In this interview, I'm speaking to Chris Cox, aka the mind reader who can't read minds. Mr. Chris Cox, how are you?
All right, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. I'm very well. So I'm going to do a little kind of preamble into this because we've already done a preamble, but I've not recorded that bit so people don't know. So I'll do the preamble now I'm recording. The interesting thing about this conversation for me is I don't know very much about you. I know who you are and I know of you, but you're from a different generation. You're from that kind of young, good-looking, talented generation of magicians that makes my life a misery.
Yeah.
So just sort of give me a little bit of background into sort of, you know, where you are at the moment and how you kind of, you know, briefly how you got to be where you are at the moment.
Yeah, I suppose it's a really good point. Many magicians don't really know me or weirdly haven't seen me, which is good and bad in equal measure. It somewhat frustrates me that magicians don't really go and see other magicians, but also it's kind of a good thing. So if you don't know me, well done, you're probably the best sort of person. But I say I'm a mind reader who can't read minds. And for me, I've done 5 different shows at the Edinburgh Festival. Ever since I was 21, in my last year of uni, I went and used my final lot of my student loan to go up and do an Edinburgh Festival show, and I've always done mentalism in them. So I've done that. I've then done bits on telly, like little bits here and there. I've got to tour the show all over the place. I've done a couple of UK tours, a couple of New Zealand tours, and yeah, basically that's what I do. I put together Edinburgh shows and then go out and do them.
Okay, and so you said you did it as on a student loan. I mean, how was the whole putting together of the shows for Edinburgh? Because when I was at university, I went up as an actor to Edinburgh.
Yeah,
but you took your one-man show to Edinburgh, which is renowned for being a bit of a place where you just take money, throw it into a big hole, and bury it, isn't it?
They say the average each performer loses is around £7,000 in Edinburgh.
Fantastic. So as a student, you weren't worried about that then?
No, it was fine. I was losing. I already got massive debt. Might as well add to it. So yeah, I like everyone who you speak to who was into magic when I was young. And then, in fact, I'm from Bristol. My parents used to bring me up to London, and we'd go to Hamleys. So I've spoke to Andy Nyman about this, and I'm pretty sure either you or Nyman or one of those guys would have sold me my first Sven deck and my first set of dynamic coins.
That would have been Nyman because he had the best Sven dem.
It's amazing
on the planet. Yeah,
I love it. So then magic. I got into mentalism quite quickly actually after magic, because I was always a precocious little performer kid, and for me, I was like performing and acting and theatre were the things that I loved. So realised that mentalism quite quickly was a way to perform magic, which was all about performance.
And so, did you study performance at university? Was that your?
Yeah, I did a degree in drama at Bristol.
Right. That's useful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very handy. Done very little with it. So I did that degree and then was doing kind of little shows in Bristol, just sort of trying little bits out, trying out things, seeing, because I've never been part of the world of magic. I never went to conventions, never went to lectures, never went to magic societies. I very much just sort of bought books and DVDs and tried out stuff. And was always trying out things at university in like little rooms for small little audiences. And thought, all right, I'll go do Edinburgh. I want to do Edinburgh. So I saved up my final year's worth of student loan and went up for the first year. I did 9 shows at a place called C Venues, which are kind of a medium-sized venue. And they went really well. So I then thought, oh, I'll do it again, and then I'll do it again. So each year I kept upping venue size, upping kind of the prestige, supposedly, of the venue. And then I've constantly tried. I think the first 3 shows were variations of classics, me finding myself as a performer, trying to do different things. And then the last 2 shows, Fatal Distraction, the current show, and Mind Over Patter before that, were very much me trying to create a completely new mentalism show in terms of methods, tricks. Everything comes out of me trying to do something different to that anyone else is doing. And certainly the current show is very different to any other type of mind reading show around.
And that's the Fatal Distraction one.
Yeah, and the reason is it's because my rules have always been when creating shows. Number 1, never have anyone write anything down on stage at any point. Number 2 was create a theatrically entertaining show. Number 3 was try and make it different to any other mentalist out there. And the current show I've gone and put a narrative in it. It was written as a one-man play. It's a proper piece of theatre. It is a show with tricks rather than a trick show. So there's a narrative, there's a story, there's acting in it, there's a set, there's lighting, but also within that there's all these mind-reading stunts which no one's done or seen before, or at least variations of certain things.
I mean, that's a really interesting approach to it. I mean, because I'm from a drama background, from an acting background as well, and I find that approach. I mean, first of all, looking at your approach there, and it's actually stuff that I've sort of written about and talked about. You know, this idea about creating from by constricting yourself, by restricting yourself, I think is a really underused technique by magicians, because we've got this massive pool of information and what people do is I think they just kind of swim around and flay about.
Yeah,
whereas what you've done
you grab onto
is that thing about narrow it, is saying, right, here's what I've got to do, it's got this and this, and it makes life a lot easier, doesn't it? And,
yeah, it does. And
more difficult at the same time, in a weird sort of way. Does that work? Can I say that? Does that make
sense?
Yeah,
it does, because you kind of, by limiting, you've got a much easier choice of going, right, I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to do this, this, and this. Of course, then you have to work out how you're going to do it. And they're ideas that I've had bubbling around for a couple of years that are starting to come to fruition, probably for the next show, of thoughts of going, right, this is what I want to do, but I don't want it to be this, this, or this. So I'm then working out ways to do it. And just things like, I knew in this show I wanted to do a drawing dupe because I hadn't done one for 4 shows, but I wanted it to be really visual. So I gave the premise of, all right, I want 2 easels, a screen dividing them, and I want people to see us draw at the same time and the drawings to match up. And then it was a case of, all right, well, that's all right for one, but then gets boring. So then look in the theatricality side of it and the drama and go, right, where's the dramatic tension here? How do we build it up? How do we make it more impressive? So that in that instance, the final drawing, I would turn my pad over, there'd be a drawing there, and that person would end up drawing what I've already drawn.
Right.
So I don't think I'd have got that if I hadn't limited myself to, right, no one draws anything in advance, no one does anything on stage, they come up, they draw, this is how I want it to look, how do I make it happen?
And I mean, it is interesting. I mean, first of all, you come from, you know, I'll kind of get to my point in a minute. You come from a sort of a pretty good pedigree, in the sense that you come from Bristol and you're a mentalist, and I know some really good mentalists from Bristol. There's a young man called Peter Clifford.
Lovely Peter Clifford, who
was also an actor, a brilliant actor, a great theatrical mentalist. He's very much into this concept of putting together theatrical pieces. So, and then there's another guy by the name of Darren Brown, who comes from Bristol. So what is it about Bristol? Is it just the fact that it's so far out of the way from anything, you've got nothing better to do than read?
Yeah. To pretend to read people's minds. Yeah, I think, I don't know, it's an odd one. I suppose certainly a lot of my my thinking has been influenced, like any performer these days, by Andy and Darren, and by Peter Clifford. The last 2 shows he's worked with me on, in sort of, we've gone around and talked through them, and I've helped him out on his brilliant shows he does at the Tobacco Factory a little bit. And I think, I don't know, maybe it is a theatrical thing in Bristol. I remember a lot of my youth in Bristol was spent at the Old Vic or the Tobacco Factory or the Hippodrome, seeing shows.
Oh, well, I mean, that's the thing. You have got the Old Vic, which is obviously one of the finest drama schools, and I was turned down by the Old Vic.
Oh, well,
I auditioned and I didn't get in, but there we are. We'll leave that. But so the sort of theatrical approach to it is, I mean, it's interesting what you said at the beginning, that mentalism, which is, you know, the new black or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because of Darren, mentalism is obviously very, very fashionable. But it is, for me, it's one of those things that people do because it's technically, and it's technically, it can be very easy to achieve the effect, but dramatically, I think it's very difficult to achieve the effect. And so what you end up with is a lot of kind of half-baked mentalists. I'm going to get killed for saying that, but there's a lot of half-baked mentalists. So the theatrical approach is really, so what is your approach when you take it? I mean, you say we've got the restriction thing, so what's your sort of line, you know, how do you go about finding the solutions?
I think you make a really good point. It's probably one of the reasons I do mentalism and got into it, is because I could not be bothered to sit around with learning sleights. I can do the basics and know the basics of magic and read up on that and would do that. But certainly, I think you've said it on these before, that actually the best way to think about mentalism is to have that background and knowledge of magic as well. But it is a lot easier sometimes. But I think where I suppose where you like you said about the half-baked things, it's where people go, oh, the method's easy, but then don't put in the effort that a magician would for a method, and a mentalist in theory should put that effort into performance and what the performance side of it is. So I think that's where I spend a lot of my time. And so what was the original question? I've gone off with it. How do where do I put it?
So what's
together?
the sort of, you know, just what is your
Yeah.
Where do you get your methods from? I mean, are you someone who'll say, right, oh, I could do that doing a centre tear, or oh, I could do that using a
I think what's the trick I want? How do I want to accomplish it? And then how do I get there? I always think of tricks like trees, and that I've got the perfect tree, which is the perfect idea for a trick, and I need to hack off at branches to make that trick work. And ideally, I want to hack the branches at the back that no one sees.
Right.
So we'll take an idea and then work backwards with it. In the old show, there's this thing I do with clothing where there's a clothing rail, and the idea behind that was a bit of visual mentalism. And because I once went to the Apple store wearing the exact same colour T-shirt as the Apple employees, I got questioned by everyone in there about Apple products. And I thought, oh, if I was a real mind reader, I wouldn't really be able to do that. That would never happen. I'd know what other people might wear. So that trick came out of that.
Right.
And in that instance, it was always a visual, two items, screen dividing them, people watch, it builds. It's almost like it's as close, I think, as a silent trick can be. It's not, there's a lot of talking in it, but it's you visually see what happens. And then within that, I build in parameters around how does an audience think this is going to be done? Well, they're probably going to think someone might be telling me, in which case I need to do a bit where I completely cover up the other person so no one can see what they're doing.
Right.
Prove that. The current show was slightly different because I had this narrative and story and always knew what tricks I wanted to do. I've always wanted to do a Q&A and have felt it's taken me 5 years of Edinburgh shows and tours to get to a stage where I'm a good enough performer to sell a Q&A, but a Q&A always bored me. So for me, it was how do I do a Q&A which isn't a Q&A, which feels interesting, which feels exciting and looks brilliant. A magician in New Zealand came to see it and said it looked like genuine magic to them. It looked like I was doing what I said I was doing, which is a really big compliment because that was the idea behind that effect. It's how do I do a Q&A which isn't a Q&A?
Okay, yeah, because Q&As are. I mean, I've only ever seen sort of two Q&As that because I've not seen yours. I've only seen two Q&As that I kind of went, oh, that's very good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which I think was Darren's and Mark Paul's.
Yeah,
Mark is a great blindfold.
No. And I've always loved them as pieces of performance, but they've always left me cold in that. Certainly my performance style, I'm not a big fan of revealing personal information and those sorts of things. It's always lighthearted, it's more fun, it's more slightly piss-takey.
Yeah.
And in this show in particular, it's more about me and that dynamic because the show's about this relationship. So in this instance, it was a trick where I get the audience to think of things for me to do, and I start doing the things they are thinking of. That was the initial concept for the Q&A, and then taking that to various stages.
We did a thing together at the Tobacco Factory for Peter Clifford. We did one of the Peter's Friends shows, and what I found interesting about you is, you know, we were going to be working. You know, I was Chris Cox, mentalist. Okay, going to be working with a mentalist. I have never seen a mentalist arrive with so many props and such a massive setup. Isn't the point of mentalism the fact that you can carry it around in your jacket pocket? Isn't that? You're not afraid of sort of stuff, are you?
That was the.
There's that. I mean, there's not really a question in there, but I mean, is there? Would you? So have you got sort of no limits on what you would do in order to create the effect, kind of thing?
Yeah, no limits, particularly because I am a theatre performer. I go perform theatre shows. I don't do close up. I don't do walk around really, unless I'm asked very specifically. So it's always a show. So I look at the show, and annoyingly, that as I've gone down the years has just meant more and more props. My flat that we're in a minute. If I showed you around it, you'd see 90% of the stuff that's lying about is props for the show that I've made to look a bit like things that might sit in a flat. But it annoys me having to carry that stuff around, and it annoys me that when I tour, I have to tour with a tour manager and a big van because it makes stuff a lot more expensive. But I think it makes for a better show. That clothing trick, I'm going out to do this thing in Mexico in 2 weeks, which means today I've spent most of the day trying to find a box that I can put the clothing trick in and all the bits for it to take it out there, which is annoying, but I think it's a good enough trick to do that. Fatal Distraction show, I made I foolishly went, all right, yeah, proper show. So went set, lights. So when we tour, we have a massive van with bits of set, bits of props. The actual stuff for the tricks is probably, for Fatal Distraction, smaller than anything else. I can fit it all in 2 boxes. But I think there's often because I've not been part of that magic world of all pack small, play big. I just go, what would I like to do? Right, how do I do it? Oh, it means having 2 massive easels. Okay, well, I'll carry 2 massive easels everywhere with me. Oh, it means having a bookcase full of props. Fine, I'll take the bookcase full of props. It means having this. It means having that. I'll do anything that I need to do to create the theatrical moment that I want.
You're never made a street performer. That's
Not at all.
Spend your life paring down. Now here's the thing. So we've got these Edinburgh shows. 5 shows you've done in Edinburgh. It's quite. You said you're not doing it this year. I mean, is there a reason for not doing it this year?
Yeah, I think when I did Mind Over Patter, which was 2010, it was a
great name for a show, by the way.
Sorry.
Great name for a show, by the way.
Thank you. It was the original working title was Heavy Mental, but I couldn't think of enough puns, so I went Mind Over Patter. So that was a show where I wanted to start to push away from what I'd done before, and kind of made a halfway house of pushing away. And I think if anyone had seen me in the years before, I was a younger, less knowledgeable performer, and that show sort of, I felt I'd gone on leaps and bounds as a performer in terms of creating my own effects, in terms of theatrically structuring a show that had a theme rather than a narrative, but it had 90% my own material, 10% reworkings of some great stuff I'd found. And then I thought, right, the year after in Edinburgh, I want to do something different. And then decided I needed more than a year to do that, because I got to take Mind Over Patter to New Zealand at the beginning of 2011, and I came back from it in May, and Edinburgh was August, and I didn't think there was enough time to fully devote myself to a show. So I started then creating the 2012 show. And having that year off meant I created a show that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, to really focus on it, to do something different. And I think the amount of stuff you have to churn out for Edinburgh for a whole new hour as a magician is a hell of a lot if you want to do what I do, which isn't just buy tricks and do them. So actually having a year off means I can go back and give something fresh and something new and something different, rather than going and doing a reversion of what I kind of have done before.
Right.
And I think,
I was just going to say, because I mean the thing with Edinburgh now is, so you would have done 6 years ago would have been your first one.
Yeah.
Right. So 6 years ago, we would have just been on the tail end. I'm just trying to think, because there was very few magic shows.
Yeah, it was that year when I did my first lot of shows. There was me, and that was it. There was no Pete and Ali and Barry and Stuart. I think did when I did my second year. Everything.
Did Mark Salem do that year? Was that
Mark Salem did about 2 or 3 years before?
Right, because there was a couple. Because what I'm saying is now, if you go to Edinburgh, magic is all over the place, isn't it?
Yeah.
The one-man show is kind of the thing to do now.
Yeah, it's the big thing. And I part of me would like to think that me, Pete, Barry and Stuart and Ali have kind of trailed that technique of going up and doing an Edinburgh show and getting something out of it. Because you have to look at Edinburgh as a trade show. It's expensive. It's really expensive to do. But you get some good stuff out of it. If you get a good show, you get good quotes, you get good reviews, you get other shows. I wouldn't have got to do 2 New Zealand tours if they hadn't, because they came to see me in Edinburgh. I went, yeah, come do the show in New Zealand. And I think it's a great thing, because you look at the comedy section of the program. There's 200 odd pages of shows. The problem with magic, of course, is that old adage: if you see a bad magician, you say you don't like magic, rather than if you see a bad comedian, you say you don't like that comedian. And I think the shows, as long as they're up to a great standard, and there's a high level of standard now in Edinburgh, then it's great, because the more people see a magic show, the more they'll come and see more. Hopefully, if people go up to Edinburgh last year, they will have seen Pete, they'll have seen Barry and Stuart, they'll have seen Ali Cook, and they'll have seen me, because we're doing very different shows, but all within the realms of a magic show with some laughs in it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great thing to go up and do an Edinburgh show. The audiences in Edinburgh are slightly more jaded than they were before, and certainly the reviewers are. They know magic more than... They don't know it enough, but they've seen, in theory, they'll have seen at least one of me, Pete, Barry, Stuart, or Ali at some point. So that's why I go out and think of, right, what can I do which no one else is going to do? Because they've seen an invisible deck, or they've seen a one-ahead routine, or they've seen a this or that. So it's trying to come up with something which no one else is going to do because it's becoming a bit of a saturated marketplace now.
So just in terms of just as sort of as someone who's got that level of experience doing Edinburgh shows, there's going to be people who are listening to this who are thinking, you know, I'm going to do Edinburgh. What I mean, give me your top 5 tips for doing an Edinburgh show.
I think actually a good example recently has been Morgan and West, who are lovely chaps and do a really good show in Edinburgh, and they did exactly what I did in my first year. And you have to know why. The first thing you have to do is know why you're going to go to Edinburgh and what you want from it. What's your goal? And once you've set that goal, you have to work out how you're going to achieve that goal. And the goals change every year. Certainly, in those first years of Edinburgh, you have to know your goal's not going to be to make money. It's to, your goal's kind of often to lose as little as possible. But the thing you get out of Edinburgh, which is why it's worth that investment, is you get 30 shows in a row of doing your show.
Right.
You are immeasurably a better performer by the end of that than you were at the beginning, and your show is so much better. And you are surrounded by like-minded, creative individuals, and you see lots of shows, and you become you go through your highs and lows, but you become so much better because of that. So it's sort of knowing at the beginning what you want from the end of it. It's remembering that, you know, the big venues are great and it's really good if you're getting them and you should apply to them, but there's a saturation there because there's so much on, and you have to know that in those early stages, flyering is really good. It's really important. Morgan West are very good at it. You'll see them if you go to Edinburgh on the Royal Mile flyering every day, and they will sell out every night because they fly it all day, every day.
Right.
It's an odd one for me because the first year I went up, I just wanted to see whether I could do it, and I did, and I got good reviews. The second year, my aim was, all right, I want to get a promoter, and that year I had a really good show. It's the first time I really stuck a proper theme together and got a very successful show which sold out and got great reviews, and then I got a promoter from it. So then the year after that was, okay, get a show which I can then tour with the show before it, and then the year after that was do something different, get some TV work, and I got bits of that, and then last time it was do a narrative show, get more good reviews.
So it's always been, so Edinburgh, I mean, it's a stepping stone, it's a platform, isn't it? It's just another way of getting yourself known, as opposed to the end result, as it were. So it's a means to an end as opposed to an end result.
Yeah, I think but I suppose it's also the end result because you create a show for Edinburgh. My year becomes structured around the fact that August will be Edinburgh and I need a show ready to start previewing in May. So your end result is you have a show at the end of it as well that you can go out and tour. And it's, for me, I think, I suppose you're probably similar in that I love performing. And I want to go out and do a show that I can perform in Edinburgh and then take and perform elsewhere.
Right, and so you say you're sort of previewing in May. So are you very disciplined?
Yes and no. I'm lazy, but I try to be disciplined within my laziness.
Okay.
I sort of will have a schedule. So Edinburgh, like if we think about Fatal Distraction, that was August 2011. So August 2010, doing the Mind Over Patter show, I had the initial idea for to do a narrative-based mind reading show themed around love. And then that sort of ruminated in my mind for 6 to 9 months, and then when I got back from New Zealand tour and finished sort of Mind Over Patter properly at spring 2011, I then started writing it, and it's always a taste of I'll spend, like now I'm just starting to think about the next show, so I'll consume a lot of magic books and read through ideas that I just jot down at any point, and will then start to work out what the 6 tricks, because roughly it's 6 tricks in an hour, what the 6 main tricks are going to be and what the end trick will be within the theme, what the story will be. And then I'll try and do this thing. The best way I found about writing is I'll set aside writing days and I'll do it on the hour, which is a screenwriter friend told me about, where I'll set a clock for an hour and I will write for that hour. I'll turn the internet off and I will write. It doesn't matter if I'm not writing the show, but I will write something.
Yeah.
And then I will have an hour where I will read, and then I'll have an hour's rest. And then I will do that for certain days until the show starts to form, and then I will keep playing around. I'll have lots of conversations with friends who are magicians and friends who are performers as ideas are forming, as I try to work out what the best way is to do what I want to do. And then I'll just start playing around with stuff. I'll try and put little bits into sets if I'm doing stand-up gigs or cabaret. But it's not really until the first preview where I put everything together and find out whether it's going to work or not.
Right.
But I'll have a lot and lot of rehearsals, sort of running that show in and out, lots and lots and lots, and working on that script. And
so do you bring in an outside director for that?
yeah, I do. I have various people I've worked with over the years. Some magicians, some just performer friends, but I'll always bring outside people in both the development stage and the sort of getting it up on its feet stage.
And have you always done that? Did you do that from the first show?
Yeah, the first show, one of my best friends, a guy called Ben Furness, who just did my degree with me at uni, he quite liked magic, so he said, "Oh yeah, I'll help you out. I'll come up to Edinburgh with you." And we created those first sort of 2 or 3 shows together, and he was always that. He didn't know a huge amount about magic, which was really useful because he would be that outside looker in. But then he became too wrapped up in it like me, so we'd need someone else to come and look in. But yeah, I've always had someone who will take on a director role.
And you've always found that, because I always think anyone who puts a one-man show, I mean, I've done one-man shows before, and I've made the mistake of thinking, because I've trained, you know, I've got a theatre background, I've made the mistake of going, no, I can do this. This is, I don't need anyone else, and I think it's a huge mistake personally. I mean,
Yeah.
do you think, you know, we're saying a top tip for taking a show to Edinburgh: get a director, get someone in as a key point.
It's so vital. I think it's just, you know, no acting company would ever put a show on stage without a director. And I think even if they don't have to have the role of director, but you have to have people looking in on it, and you have to have people that you can talk through ideas with, who both people who know methods and people who don't know methods, because it just makes you just such a better performer. And it also, you know, you don't have to believe everything they say. Matt Edmondson, who I work with on the radio show, who's a great knowledge in magic, and he's probably the most creative person I know. And we have very similar mindsets, and we'll talk about stuff. And he'll come and see a show, and we'll talk. We were talking as I was developing the show, and then once he saw it, we talked about ideas. And he'll say some things, and I'll say, "No, I think you're wrong. The reason I've not done that is because of this, this, and this." And those reasons why you discount a piece of advice are as important as the reasons why you take on a piece of advice, because by thinking as to why that piece of advice isn't right for you, you actually make yourself a better person performing, and the show becomes better.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, so just going back, this was something I forgot to mention. I do write notes as I do this. I'm not that disorganised. I just wanted to mention something, because you were saying about the writing side of it all for you.
Yeah.
And you use this on the hour thing, which is a script, you know, this. And I just wanted to mention, I don't know if you know about it, but there's this free writing idea of just sort of writing regardless of whatever it is you're writing. And there's a book. I'm going to recommend a book. I like to recommend a book in these, if I ever remember. And that's a book called Accidental Genius.
Accidental Genius.
By a guy called Mark Levy, who is a magician based in New York. If you ever look at the Joel Bauer book or the Steve Cohen book, Mark Levy is the guy who co-wrote all of their books. So he's a very interesting character. I don't know him. I have no connection with him. But he's written a book called Accidental Genius, which talks about the writing process and how to write to generate ideas. And for me, as being someone who took up writing rather late in life, in terms of blogging and that kind of thing, just that dumping everything out onto paper, I think is a fantastic creative exercise for people to do. Yeah.
And I think it's like, one of the most useful things is just the Notes app in my iPhone. If I'm out and I have an idea, it goes straight in there.
And it's always that thing about get it out of your head and get it down on paper, or get it into your phone or something like that.
And then I find I don't do it so much because I live in London and don't drive anywhere now. But when I used to live in Bristol, we'd be coming up to London a couple of times a week. Those car journeys are where I'd take an idea and just let it bounce around my head for an hour. And I suppose I do that on the tube now. But that idea of, once you've got an idea down, just play with it in your mind. Think, right, what if I go there? What if I do that? What if I did this instead? This thing I'm going to do in Mexico next week. They said, "Oh, can you do a 20-minute show?" Which isn't. They don't want me to do sort of a stage show. They want me to do a little 20-minute intimate thing in a room where 40 people come in, watch it, they go out. Some more people come in, they watch it, they go out. So in my head, I've been playing around with sort of the tricks I'd like to do with that. And just sort of yesterday was kind of having a chat with Matt about it. Sort of got to the bottom of what effects I was going to take to do it with, and how I was going to put them together in the order of them, and why it would work one way or the other. But only by thinking through every possible variable do you actually get that a sense of, okay, I think I know what it is now.
And I also think there's that element of, just because an idea doesn't seem like a good idea, don't drop it. I think that's one of the things about putting it down on paper, is you can have an idea, you can think, oh, that's crap, and forget about it. Whereas if you have an idea, think it's crap, but I'll write it down, you may revisit it, you know, 6 months down and go, actually, that's not that bad an idea, you know, different mindset at a different time.
There's a trick in photo distraction, which was an idea I had about 5 years ago that I wrote down and never kind of found a place in the show for it, and never really thought it would work. And then as I started writing this show, I realised, oh, there's a theme here which that trick would be perfect for. And I'd have forgotten completely about that whole trick if I hadn't written it down. And
it is the old thing, you know, if you want to have one good idea, have 200 bad ones first, you know, and that's kind of the way it works. So you're doing all this sort of travelling stuff with the show. You got Mexico, you do the New Zealand thing. That all came through Edinburgh, the New Zealand thing, yeah.
Yeah, New Zealand.
And you kind of got a connection there now with New Zealand.
Yeah, I have. I did. It's a beautiful country and really lovely people and great people. Just a long way away.
You wouldn't want to live there, though, would you?
No. Well, if I were to live in 1980, I might live there.
A friend of mine emigrated there and moved back about 2 years later. So,
I love New Zealand. It's a bad place to be going when you're a mentalist with lots of props, because that's an expensive excess baggage bill to get it all there.
No, and it is a beautiful country. So whereabouts do you go in New Zealand?
The first year I went and did a week of shows in Auckland, just for the Auckland. The comedy festival's divided between Auckland and Wellington. I went out for kind of 3 weeks, did a couple of previews in the Classic Comedy Club, did some holidaying, came back, did a week of shows. And before the first show, I did a TV gala special. And from that, and from the fact that I was the first kind of first ever magic act really there, the first act which was doing something which wasn't just straight stand-up or character stand-up, I sold out that entire run before I started, so we added more, which was amazing. And it did that thing of getting great reviews, and people didn't know who Darren was there, so I didn't ever have that comparison to have to deal with. And it was just a really successful, fun run of shows. So then they came to see the show again in Edinburgh, the new show, and liked that, so then brought me out again this year. So we did a week in Auckland in a 600-seater brand new theatre, and then a week down in Wellington in a smaller venue. And yeah, it's incredible to get to someone see a show, like the show enough to put the money behind bringing you out 27 hours from your home.
Yeah, it is a long way, and I'm actually going to go back and say I love New Zealand. I went out there. I've been to New Zealand and worked in New Zealand. It's a beautiful place.
It is.
But the reason I'm saying I wouldn't want to live there is because you burn up material very quickly, because it's quite a small island. It's quite a small place, small population. I mean, Nick Nicholas and Gary Animal have both done the New Zealand thing, and they both moved back because they ran out of audiences. I think is.
Yeah, but it's a great creative place as well. Sam Wills, who does The Boy with Tape on His Face, he's a Kiwi, and he sort of developed his act while in New Zealand. There's a great magician, Paul Romney, out there, and Richard Webster, who I meet up with when I go there, and they have some really great thinking there. And I think it's partly because it's so far from anywhere else.
Yeah, I think there is that element of it's so detached.
Yeah.
That they come up with, it's a little bit. There's a number of magicians over the years who've sort of separated themselves from the world of magic and then come up with some phenomenal stuff because they've had nothing to do with the world of magic. Yeah. So there's a lesson in that as well, isn't there? Sort of,
Yeah, I think I said it roughly at the beginning. I get frustrated. I remember I rarely look or post on magic forums these days unless I want to plug a show that I'm doing. But I remember around the time of Hans Clock being on, seeing a post on a magic forum where someone was like, "Oh, I work down the road, but I'm not going to bother going," and I got really frustrated because I think the best way to get better at something is to go see people do the same thing. Because if you like it or if you don't, you work out why you like it or why you didn't like it, and you get better. And it always frustrates me that magicians don't go and see a lot of magic. I would hate to have more magicians in my audience, but also I'd love the fact there'd be more magicians in my audience, because particularly with this show, I think there's a lot to learn, hopefully, from it. But in the same way, as I consume live material and the odd book and the odd DVD, and from chatting to friends who are magicians, that's where I get my magic knowledge from. The rest of my inspiration and ideas come from going to the theatre 2-3 times a week, which I do, or watching movies. It's kind of finding those other areas to find inspiration in.
Well, I mean, just the theatre. I mean, I mean, I live down in Bournemouth now, so I don't get to the theatre that often. But I've seen a few things, and recently, and just that element. I mean, I know you tweet a lot about going to the theatre, and you've just had this massive. You've got this massive love of Matilda at the moment, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, I've got a love of Matilda because I've lived with it for a while. Because I'm friends with Tim, who wrote it. So when he started writing it, him and I went to see lots of musicals together. So I've sort of seen its genesis from an initial idea to the final thing, but also genuinely think it's the best musical. It's the best new musical ever for the last 20 years. It's probably
it's phenomenal. My daughter sings things from it because she does a lot of musicals. But I mean, it must be. I mean, Tim Minchin is a hugely creative guy, isn't he? Yeah. Slightly insane to the point.
Yeah, like I get frustrated by how brilliant he is. He makes me think I'm worthless because I sit there and go, "How are you doing all of this stuff?"
Incredible. I've done shows where he's been the cabaret. I've not worked with him. That would sound a bit, would put me in the wrong position. I haven't worked with him. I've worked at a venue where he has been the star act. But he's a very creative guy. So, I mean, with that, you did this kind of brings me on to the fact that you're also involved in broadcasting and radio and that kind of thing. How did that? Is that something that you just sort of sidestepped into, or?
It's like magic for me, actually. Theatre, magic, comedy, radio, TV were all the same thing. They were always things I did when I was young and I loved, and I always knew I was going to do something with them. If you kind of asked anyone who I went to school with, they'll have probably say, "Oh yeah, when I was 12, I was on some kids TV shows. I'd go and do shows." It was always that's all I was ever going to do. And radio was an early love in the same way as magic was. And the thing I love about radio is that's a very immediate form. You have an idea, you do it. Where magic's are slightly different. You have an idea, you can kind of do it, but you probably should spend a long time working on that idea. So when I was in Bristol, I started work experience at Radio Bristol, and then I went to start university at Bristol and would spend most of my evenings producing an evening radio show with a guy called Richard Lewis, who I still write a lot of stuff with now. He won a BAFTA for writing on Noel's House Party. He's amazing. So it was always a radio love, and then I got into Radio 1 off the back of that, and have always, through all my years of doing Edinburgh, I take most of my holiday from Radio 1 as August, and I go up and do Edinburgh. And I've always done the two side by side. I've gigged and worked. And this year I've gone freelance and no longer BBC staff, which allows me more time to do what I'm doing, and more time off. But it was always, for me, radio was something I was going to go into in the same way magic. And the fact that I can do the two side by side still at the minute is amazing.
And do you find that because it's interesting, because a lot of people will seek inspiration from theatre or inspiration from, films and TV. But very few people would say, I was inspired by the radio. I mean, is there stuff that you've kind of... Because I'm very interested. I follow a podcast. Oh, God, just the name of it is completely gone out of my head. It's a New York-based thing, and it's called, and I'm going to look it up as we talk, but I find it hugely inspirational in the sense that it's very much soundscapes, and it's very much... Radio Lab, it's called. Have you heard of Radio Lab?
Lab, yes, yeah.
And so, have you ever, has the radio aspect of this sort of auditory aspect of what you do ever kind of influenced the visual?
I think it has, probably. I think I've always kept, certainly while staff at Radio 1, I've always kept the two very separate within the world of radio. I've never... Unless I've been specifically asked, I've never done any tricks or anything on air, but I went through a stage where I did quite a lot. So I've always had the two sort of different areas of my brain, so they wouldn't cross over. But there's certainly tricks that I developed because of doing radio. There's a thing in a show a while back which was involving mobile phones and voicemails, and there's a thing in the current show which also uses voicemails, and there was a thing in the show before that using iTunes, which are all kind of radio-y ideas in terms of methods were based on ideas of how I can do things with radio, and presentation was based on that. And I think the thing, I suppose, radio is very transient, and that made me think a lot about how do we connect with an audience through speaking. With the Matt Show, we do comedy, although we don't list it as a comedy show in case anyone complains that we're not funny.
Not very funny.
But we churn through ideas because every week is a whole new set of ideas that we need to do. And that creative process, I think, with radio makes my magic creative process a lot better.
Yeah, just thinking, because I mean, just as I'm talking about it to you, and I'm thinking about radio. I mean, I think as a mentalist, you deal with, visual ideas, you deal with, the written thing, and I think maybe sound is a sort of an underused aspect of mentalism. Just that I'm in my head now. So this is what I've got, this kind of bizarre. I mean, I just can't. So just that idea of sound being something that's predictive, or I don't know. I just thought that's very interesting. In fact, if anyone hasn't listened to Radiolab, listen to that. And I just think the sort of what you can do with sound is incredible. I mean, there are some sort of sound artists now who create these things which are just phenomenal. And I think there must be a place, not just for technology, but for the actual sense itself.
Right. It's weird because actually in Photo Distraction, I had a video designer and used sound designer as well. And the sound initially, there's two bits still where it exists. Initially, it was a soundscape running through the whole thing, so all the bits of a story kind of had a motif of a light clicking on and off, and then sound effects to accompany what I was saying. And we used it in the first preview, and then I realised it's really distracting. So it didn't as well as I thought it would. However, the bits we kept are bits where I used beds. In the same way I'm talking on radio, you have a bed behind you, which is a bit of music which plays to keep sort of energy and pace up. There's two tricks. The thing I do with the Memorized magazine and Fringe program and the sort of Taskmaster style Q&A, those bits have beds under them, bits of music which kind of have dramatic highs and lows, and I will use them to structure my performance in what is a free-flowing bit of people shout stuff out, think stuff, and I react to it. I know where those sound cue hits are for me to bring something up or to find something a struggle.
Yeah, I think it do. I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing that a lot of people will put the one-man show thing together and shows together, and yet they won't think of sound as being an ingredient. Sound,
lighting, and visuals are all. I have a whole video display throughout the show with various things on it. Partly because I use video in the show. I had a whole show years ago, but I keep thinking I might bring back where I had a version of me on the screen and I'd interact with me, and it would be me on the screen that would do all the prediction-based stuff.
Right.
But it would never feel like a prediction because I'd say, "Hey, name a celebrity." Someone would say Tom Cruise, and then me on the screen would go, "Is that Tom Cruise? Oh, good choice." So it's sort of a hidden prediction because you go, "Well, that's pre-recorded, so he somehow."
Yeah.
But those sort of things were always important for me to have that visual element and that sound and that set and that lighting. And even as simple as what's the pre-show music, I think really carefully about what songs people will hear as they come in and how they'll connect to the show.
Right.
And what the music is at the end. And, I think loving theatre and loving musical theatre, I see what music can do to you in terms of emotional impact. So you'd be a fool not to use that.
Yeah, I think it's a real good... There's good English for you. I think that's real good. That's real good. That I think it's a really good point in the fact it's actually it's going to stop me in my tracks a little bit. In terms of I've written on my pad in big letters sound.
Oh.
So look, there we go. Thank you very much indeed. I think we've covered a lot of different. It's been really interesting in sense of it's a totally different approach to magic, really, because you're coming at it from a different angle. And
I think having never. There was some complaint recently in the Magic Circle about me because I did an interview for the Evening Standard in which I said haven't been to Magic. I went to the Magic Circle once, and for me, it's not a place I'd like to go. It doesn't seem to thrive on creativity. And I've got friends who are magicians in the Magic Circle. And I was a bit, having avoided the world of magic for so long, and now have friends who are magicians. I was a bit disappointed that I got sort of my name got chucked through the mud a bit. Where I feel my point they kind of took out of context maybe a bit, but it was valid in that the one time I went there, I within half an hour had 2 arguments, and I'm not a person who ever argues, because I was told if I wanted to join, they don't care about my speaking. I can't wear the clothes that I would normally wear on stage. I have to wear a suit. And all these things. So I went, actually, that if I'd have developed my act in that world, I'd be doing similar stuff to lots of other people. But having not been part of that world, I think it's made me think about things differently, and I suppose that was the point I was trying to get across there, somewhat badly.
No, not at all. I mean, it's it is variety. Is a very important thing, and I think magic does struggle a little bit because it's got such a history, and I think sometimes we can sort of think there is only one way to skin a cat, and there's absolutely not. And
yeah.
Good point.
You can think, someone's already done that, so I can't do that. And if they've done it in the last 10 years and they're well known, probably you definitely shouldn't do that. But if they did it 30 years ago, then why not take that idea and turn it into something new? Take the idea that someone's done it, I can't do that, and make it, actually, someone's done that, so I can do that very differently.
Steal Like an Artist. That's another book people should read. It's called Stealing Like an Artist. You know, amateurs borrow, professionals steal. And just the differentiation being, when you borrow something, you take something that belongs to somebody else. When you steal something, you take something that belongs to someone else but make it your own.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest difference with, you know, I think magicians should be prepared to steal things and change them so much beyond recognition that if police turned up, they wouldn't know.
Yeah,
that it was the original item. So
yeah, and I think the best way of doing that is just to keep doing it. I certainly, I watched back to a DVD of one of my shows from 4 years ago. I'm sort of embarrassed. I was like, oh, it still feels a bit Darren-y, it's still a bit this, it's still a bit that. And I look at the current show and go, it's as far removed as possible as mind reading can get at the minute from that style that Darren and Andy created and made so famous.
Yeah, and I think it's great. I mean, the fact that, you know, you are doing it, you know, the 5 shows, the tours, all that kind of thing, it's great. And are you touring Fatal Distraction at the moment?
Yeah, we've just done a couple of London shows, and then we will be announcing some more in the autumn. I know I'm going to go do Bristol because I haven't done that yet with this show, and a couple of other little tour dates here and there of places I couldn't do on the last show, the last tour, and then a little London run somewhere, and then I'll try and put a new show together. And
so that will be on your website, on Twitter?
Yeah, magiccox.com, twitter.com/BigCox, facebook.com/ILoveCox. Just spell them correctly.
Yeah, all right, you'll end up in the wrong place. Lovely stuff. Chris, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Pete. It's been, I found it's really exciting. People should do these conversations just with Pete if you see him, but with people in general, because they really get your brain thinking.
Yeah, but don't record them and put them online.
Well,
that's my job. All right. Cheers, mate. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Take care. See you. Bye-bye. Thanks to Chris for talking to me, and if you've enjoyed this interview, don't forget to subscribe over at www.magicstateofmind.com and leave your comments at this and all the other interviews. Thanks very much.